It was the summer of 2023 when I decided to move into a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. I had landed a new job in a nearby town, and the commute from the old place had become unbearable. This new house seemed perfect, a quaint two-bedroom with a spacious backyard, located in a cul-de-sac where everyone seemed friendly, or so I thought. The first few weeks were uneventful. I spent most of my time settling in, arranging furniture, and getting used to the stillness of the nights. It was a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle of the apartment I had lived in before. The neighbors seemed pleasant enough. Across the street lived the Martins, an elderly couple who always waved when they saw me. To my left was an empty lot overgrown with weeds, and to my right was Mr. Oliver, a man in his late 40s who kept mostly to himself. From the beginning, there was something off about Mr. Oliver. He would stand in his front yard late at night, staring into the distance. I often caught him peering out of his windows during the day, watching people pass by, but I brushed it off as small-town eccentricity. Everyone has their quirks, right? One night, after a long day at work, I was sitting on my back porch, sipping a beer and scrolling through my phone, when I heard a strange noise. It sounded like faint tapping, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from somewhere nearby. I paused, straining my ears. It stopped. Thinking it was just a stray animal or a branch tapping against a window, I dismissed it and went back inside. The next day, I mentioned it to Mrs. Martin while collecting my mail. She frowned and exchanged a glance with her husband. "You might want to be careful at night," she said cryptically. When I pressed her, she shook her head and changed the subject. Her reluctance left me uneasy. The tapping noises became a nightly occurrence. They started softly, as if testing my patience, and then grew louder over time. One night, I decided I had had enough. Armed with a flashlight, I stepped out into the backyard to investigate. The air was cool, and the silence was oppressive. I scanned the area but found nothing. No animals, no branches swaying in the wind. Just the faint scent of damp earth and the unnerving feeling of being watched. As I turned to go back inside, my beam caught something unusual near the fence that separated my yard from Mr. Oliver's. A small pile of dirt, freshly dug. It was out of place. The grass around it was undisturbed, yet this patch looked deliberate, almost too perfect. I crouched down and poked at it with a stick, uncovering a buried metal tin. My pulse quickened. Opening the tin, I found several Polaroid photos. The images were grainy but unmistakable. They were of me, sitting on my porch, unloading groceries, walking to my car. My hands trembled as I shoved the photos back into the tin and buried it again. I sprinted inside and locked all the doors and windows. That night, I barely slept. The thought of someone, likely Mr. Oliver, watching me so closely made my skin crawl. The next morning, I considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That my neighbor was creepy and buried photos of me? It wasn't exactly concrete evidence of a crime. The situation escalated a week later. I came home from work to find my front door slightly ajar. Panic surged through me. I was sure I had locked it that morning. Cautiously, I stepped inside and called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of violation was overwhelming. I checked every room, every closet, under every bed, but found no one. Still, the sense of unease lingered. That night, I installed a security camera in the backyard and another by the front door. I needed proof, something tangible to confront Mr. Oliver or take to the police. For a few days, nothing happened. The cameras captured nothing unusual, and I began to think I had overreacted. But then the footage from the fourth night sent chills down my spine. At around 2 a.m., the backyard camera captured a figure standing just beyond the fence line. It was Mr. Oliver. He was motionless, staring at my house, his face partially obscured by shadows. He stood there for nearly an hour before turning and disappearing into the darkness. The police needed to see this. When I showed the footage to the local authorities, they were sympathetic but not particularly helpful. "He hasn't committed any crimes," the officer said. "We can't arrest someone for standing in their own yard, but we'll make a note of it." It was frustrating, but at least the incident was documented. Things took a darker turn soon after. One morning, I woke up to find my car tires slashed. A note was taped to the windshield. It read, "Stay quiet." My heart pounded as I scanned the street. No one was around. I called the police again, but they dismissed it as a random act of vandalism. "Could be kids," they said. "Keep an eye out." That evening, I decided to confront Mr. Oliver. It was reckless, I know, but I was fed up. I knocked on his door, and after a long pause, he opened it just a crack. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low. "I know what you've been doing," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "The photos, the stalking, it's going to stop, or I'll make sure the police take it seriously." He smirked, a chilling expression that sent a shiver down my spine. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said before slamming the door in my face. That night, I stayed awake, watching the security camera feeds. Around midnight, the motion detector alerted me to movement in the backyard. I grabbed my phone and watched the live feed. Mr. Oliver was there again, but this time he wasn't alone. He was digging. My stomach churned as I saw him pull something out of the ground. It was another metal tin, identical to the one I had found before. He opened it, removed something, and then carefully reburied it. The next day, I decided to dig up the tin. Inside, I found more photos, but these were different. They weren't of me, but of another person, a young woman. Her face was contorted in fear, her hands bound. My breath caught in my throat. This was evidence of something far worse than I had imagined. I took the photos to the police immediately. This time, they listened. They obtained a search warrant for Mr. Oliver's property. The search revealed a horrifying cache of evidence. More photos, personal belongings of several missing women, and a locked basement filled with disturbing tools. Mr. Oliver was arrested on the spot. The news spread quickly. It turned out he had been under suspicion for years, but had managed to evade capture due to lack of evidence. My discovery had finally put an end to his reign of terror. The relief was immense, but so was the guilt. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I had acted sooner, lives might have been saved. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, but I couldn't stay. The memories of those terrifying nights were too vivid. I sold the house and moved back to the city, vowing to trust my instincts in the future. To this day, I can't sit on a porch at night without feeling eyes on me, a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk just next door. It was the summer of 2023 when I decided to move into a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. I had recently separated from my long-term partner, and the change of scenery felt necessary. This new place was supposed to be a fresh start, a modest two-bedroom house with a fenced yard, nestled in a peaceful cul-de-sac. The neighbors seemed cordial enough, though I kept to myself mostly, still adjusting to living alone. Directly across from me was a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Hayes, who always tended to her roses in the mornings. To my left was a single mother, Rachel, and her boisterous young son. To my right was a house that had been vacant since I moved in. It stood slightly apart from the others, with unkempt grass and peeling paint. It had an unsettling aura, though I dismissed it as my overactive imagination. The first odd occurrence happened 2 weeks after I settled in. One night, I was in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a low, persistent creaking noise. It was faint but distinct, like someone stepping on an old wooden floor. I lived alone, so the sound immediately put me on edge. I got up, checked all the locks, and peered outside. The street was empty, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights. I chalked it up to the house settling and went back to bed. The noises didn't stop, though. Over the next few days, I heard more soft thuds, the faint scuffing of feet, and once what sounded like muffled whispers. Each time I checked, the house was empty, the street still. It was unnerving, but not enough to report to anyone. I figured I was just jumpy, adjusting to a new environment. Then, one afternoon, I noticed movement in the vacant house next door. The curtains fluttered as if someone had been watching me and quickly moved away. My heart raced. I hadn't seen anyone move in, nor had I noticed any vehicles outside. Curiosity overpowered caution, and I walked over to knock on the door. No one answered. I tried peering through a window, but the interior was dark and lifeless. Feeling foolish, I returned to my house, telling myself it was probably just a stray animal. The situation escalated a week later. I came home from work to find my back gate wide open. The latch had been bent as if forced. I checked the house carefully, every room, every closet, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, the violation left me shaken. I installed motion sensor lights in the backyard and started locking my bedroom door at night. One night, the lights triggered around 2 a.m. I bolted upright in bed, adrenaline coursing through me. Grabbing the flashlight I kept by my bedside, I crept to the back window. The yard was empty. I stepped outside cautiously, scanning the area. That's when I noticed footprints in the dirt near the fence. Large, muddy prints leading to and from the vacant house next door. I called the police the next morning. An officer came by, took a report, and assured me they'd keep an eye on the neighborhood. They knocked on the door of the vacant house but found no one inside. The officer suggested it might have been a squatter and advised me to stay vigilant. The following night, I woke to the sound of something scraping against my back door. My chest tightened as I grabbed the flashlight and phone. When I reached the kitchen, the scraping had stopped, but a shadow lingered just outside the door, tall and still. My hands trembled as I called 911. Whispering to the dispatcher that someone was in my yard. The shadow shifted and then disappeared into the darkness before the police arrived. They searched the area but found no one. The officers were polite but clearly skeptical. Could be an animal, one suggested, or maybe just someone passing through. But I knew what I had seen. Determined to get proof, I purchased a security camera and set it up facing the backyard. For several nights, nothing happened. I began to feel foolish, wondering if my anxiety was making me see things that weren't there. Then, one morning, I checked the footage and froze. At 3:14 a.m., a figure appeared on the screen. A man, dressed in dark clothing, had been standing in my yard, staring directly at the camera for nearly 5 minutes before calmly walking back toward the vacant house. The police took the footage seriously this time. They obtained a warrant to search the house next door. What they found was chilling. Inside the basement was a makeshift living space, a cot, food wrappers, and a collection of items that didn't belong to the house. Keys, wallets, photographs. Among them was a picture of me, taken from outside my window. The man was arrested later that day. He was identified as a drifter with a history of breaking and entering. While he hadn't harmed anyone in this neighborhood, the evidence suggested he had been watching me for weeks, possibly planning something far worse. The discovery left me shaken to my core. The vacant house was sealed off, and the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. I stayed for a few more months but couldn't shake the unease that lingered. Eventually, I moved away, leaving behind the little house that was supposed to be my fresh start. Even now, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night, convinced I hear faint creaking noises. I remind myself it's just the wind, but part of me will always wonder if someone's there, watching from the shadows. When I first moved into the Oak Ridge apartments, I thought I had found a haven. The complex was nestled on the edge of a quiet town, surrounded by towering pines and chirping birds. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful, affordable, and close enough to my new job. After years of bustling city life, I was ready for the slower pace. The unit I rented was a small one-bedroom on the second floor, with a balcony overlooking the communal garden. I loved it at first, the soft hum of crickets at night, the occasional laughter of kids playing below. My neighbors were polite but distant, which suited me just fine. Most notable among them was a middle-aged man named Greg, who lived in the unit directly below mine. He had a gruff demeanor but always managed a curt nod when we crossed paths in the hallway. It started subtly. A few days after I moved in, I noticed a faint tapping sound late at night. At first, I thought it was something mundane, maybe pipes or a neighbor's television. But the tapping was irregular and seemed to come from beneath my bedroom floor. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just part of apartment living. Then, small things began to go missing. Pair of scissors, coffee mug, a sock. I assumed I was misplacing them in the chaos of settling in. But when I found my toothbrush missing one morning, only to discover it later under the couch, I began to feel uneasy. One evening, I came home to find my front door unlocked. My stomach dropped. I was certain I had locked it before leaving for work. I inspected the apartment but found nothing amiss. Still, the sense of being watched lingered, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. Determined not to let paranoia get the best of me, I bought a security bar for my door and started double-checking the locks. For a while, things seemed normal. Then, one night, I heard footsteps. Not in the hallway or the apartment above. They were directly below me, heavy and deliberate. It was past midnight, far too late for anyone to be pacing around. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and an eerie silence followed. I lay in bed, my heart pounding, straining to hear anything else. Then came the tapping again, louder this time, almost as if someone was deliberately trying to get my attention. The next day, I decided to introduce myself to Greg, hoping to glean some information about the strange noises. When he opened the door, he seemed surprised but not unfriendly. "Noises? Can't say I've noticed anything," he said, scratching his head. His apartment was sparse and tidy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. The way his eyes darted around, avoiding mine, and how he kept his body partially blocking the view inside. That night, I woke to the sound of scraping. It was faint at first, like nails against wood, but it grew louder and more insistent. The noise seemed to come from the walls themselves, surrounding me. I sat up in bed, gripping my phone, debating whether to call the building manager or the police. Before I could decide, the sound stopped abruptly, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake. The following weekend, I installed a motion sensor camera in my apartment, hidden on a shelf in the living room. I needed to know if someone was entering my space. For a few nights, the camera captured nothing unusual. Then, on the fourth night, I reviewed the footage and felt the blood drain from my face. At 3:21 a.m., the video showed my front door creak open. A figure stepped inside. A man, wearing a dark hoodie, his face obscured. He moved with a chilling confidence, heading straight for my bedroom door. He stopped just outside, standing there for several minutes before quietly retreating and closing the door behind him. I immediately called the police. They arrived within minutes, taking the footage as evidence. When they searched the complex, they found no sign of forced entry, nor could they locate the intruder. The locks on my door were intact. It was as if he had a key. Suspicion fell on Greg, given his proximity and odd behavior. The police questioned him, but he denied everything. They found nothing in his apartment to implicate him. Without concrete evidence, they couldn't do much more. I began staying with friends, too terrified to sleep in the apartment alone. A week later, the building manager informed me that Greg had abruptly moved out. He left no forwarding address, and his unit was found empty except for a few personal belongings. Among them was a journal. The journal was filled with ramblings, disjointed thoughts and drawings, but what chilled me most were the sketches of my apartment, including detailed layouts of my furniture and belongings. The last entry read, "She's starting to notice. Time to move on." Even after Greg was gone, I couldn't shake the paranoia. I broke my lease and left Oak Ridge, taking nothing but essentials. To this day, I sleep with my bedroom door locked and a chair wedged under the handle. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear that faint tapping, as if he's reminding me that he'll always know where I am. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the content. As a college student, I work hard to create these videos, and I edit everything on my mobile phone. I'm hoping to upgrade to a laptop to improve the quality of my videos, but I don't want to ask for money directly. This Christmas, if you enjoy what I do, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could consider subscribing to the channel. It would mean the world to me. Your support helps me so much as I continue working toward my goals. Wishing you all a very Merry Christmas. May this festive season bring you joy and warmth. Thanks again for your support, and stay tuned for more.